Hello. If you clicked on this video, I assume that it's because you've either read a little bit of Russian literature and you'd like to learn more, or it's very possible that you haven't read any and you just keep on hearing names like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and you want to know what all the hype is about. And so if that's the case, you have 100% come to the right place. I am a graduate student. I research Russian literature, and today I have picked out a few stories that directly inspired my path for lifelong research and reading. So I hope that you at least pick up one of these, ideally. And yeah, I'll tell you a bit about why I like these books so much. So to begin, we have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And this edition that I have, this leather-bound edition, was just on my shopping list for so long, and I was so happy when I finally found it. But this is the book that essentially inspired me to take a Russian literature class in undergrad, and from then on, I just went crazy with it. So this novel is about not just a woman named Anna Karenina. She's one of the protagonists, but the other one is named Levin. And there's about 1 million secondary characters. And I urge you, if you're just getting into Russian literature, please do not be intimidated by all the names and nicknames. Absolutely any book you buy will come with a little guide at the start. And don't even let the lengths intimidate you either, because this book I read when I was 17 in grade 11 in high school, and I remember distinctly just lying on my couch for a week straight doing nothing but reading this book, and I finished it in a week's time, and so can you probably. It's hard for me to talk about this book because it means so much to me. I am not a religious person, but this is the closest thing I have to a Bible, and that's because Tolstoy was very religious. He was super Christian, and he actually later got excommunicated from the Russian Orthodox Church, but I can make another video talking about that. But essentially the main question that Tolstoy answers in this novel is, what does it mean to be a good person, and what does it take to live a good life? And I mean, there's a reason why this is a work of great literature, because these questions plague people today. This is something that every single human being probably asks themselves, and you just have to read the novel to find out whether these characters, they do find answers to them. I'll say that, but I won't say what it is. So yeah. Okay, wait, no, and last thing I'll say about Anna Karenina is that every single time I read it, I get something new out of it. It's one of those books that you can read at every phase of your life, and it'll feel like you're reading it for the first time. So please, please, please go read it. And then next I have the selected short stories of Anton Chekhov. This is the Modern Library edition, and the translators are Richard Pebayar and Larissa Volokonsky. These are the most popular commercial translators, and this edition specifically I have probably lent out, more times than I count. It's a book that I like to get people as a gift because it's got a really great selection, and Chekhov is one of my favorite Russian writers. How to describe him? Chekhov writes mostly short stories, or he wrote mostly short stories, some plays, some novellas, but he was actually a doctor, and he wrote stories to provide for his family, and he wrote a great many stories. So we have ones that are satirical, ones that are grotesque and a little bit spooky, some that are just melancholy and bittersweet, others that are lighthearted and joyous. He really does it all. So if you pick up any anthology of his, you'll get to see kind of the wide range of genre and focus that he covers. Because of Chekhov's career as a doctor, he was in close contact with all Russian people, from wealthy to poor, and he also published a book about the lives of convicts on this island where they used to send Russian convicts to, Sokolniki Island. So he had this really great interest in the Russian people, whatever their class was. And I love him so much. Russian people love him so much. There's a reason for that. He writes very simply, clearly. There's not a lot of fluff in his prose. It's simple to understand. I intend to read these stories to my kids one day. You can't help but be moved by Chekhov, honestly. The most famous story of his is The Lady with a Little Dog, which is a story about a love affair on the island of Yalta. And something about that story, and a pervasive theme throughout Chekhov's work, is this idea of social change. He was writing right at the end of the 19th century, and we all know what happens in 1917 in Russia. We have the Bolshevik Revolution. So this is a time where society was very much changing. We didn't know what it looked like to be a woman, what it meant to be in a marriage, what it meant to have a family. All these ideals were changing, and that's something that Tolstoy looks at and something that Chekhov looks at in that short story specifically. Next, what do we have? Oh, I don't have a physical copy of this, but I wanted to talk about Nikolai Gogol's short story, The Overcoat. This is a must read in every beginner's Russian literature class. Gogol was actually Ukrainian. I think it's important to mention that, but he was alive during the Russian Empire and he wrote in Russian. So that's why he's often grouped in this category. But The Overcoat is a story about just your average bureaucrat who one day saves up all his money to get this nice coat, and everybody compliments him at work about it. And it's a very absurd story. There's an element of fantasy to it. It's satirical. And it's one of the originating Petersburg texts, the other main one being The Bronze Horseman by Alexander Pushkin. And the Petersburg text is a really popular trope throughout Russian literature that basically just depicts St. Petersburg as a city of madness, a city of chaos, where appearances are deceiving. This is a trope I absolutely adore and find fascinating. So I highly recommend that story as a gateway into other Russian literature, because there's a lot of key references there that you'll probably see in other works. And I think the last novel I wanted to talk about today was Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. And this is one of my absolute favorite novels of all time. It's another one that I read pretty early on in my studies. And it is a story about generational conflict, about quite literally fathers and sons who have different opinions. And the protagonist essentially comes home from university. I think it's maybe summer vacation, or perhaps he graduated medical school, and he brings home his friend from university to his family's estate. And when he gets there, he finds that his father has remarried a servant girl. And his uncle is another important character there. And they have a lot of philosophical debates about the state of Russia and what the future of it looks like. And Turgenev was known for, I guess this novel is known for its discussion of nihilism. And the first person to talk about that was Nikolai Chernyshevsky in his novel What Is to Be Done. And this is Turgenev's response to it. And if you don't know, nihilists, at least in Russia, believed in totally eradicating the old order. It was this idea that change has to be revolutionary. It has to cut out everything that's old and start completely fresh. And that is what the protagonist of this novel believes. And that is why he comes into conflict with the older men in his life. But I feel like I'm making it sound quite dull. It's really not. There's romance in this story, there's friendship, it's about family. Um, there's a lot. There's a lot of really memorable characters. And when I read this, weirdly, as a girl living in the 21st century, I even saw parts of myself in this protagonist in terms of like that sense of youthful rebellion and that feeling that you know something that maybe your parents don't know, or that the older generation is missing out on something, maybe politically. This is why this is literature, because it doesn't matter that I wasn't alive for the abolition of serfdom in the Russian Empire, because these questions and these themes will continue on for eternity. And then lastly, I could not make this video without at least touching upon the works of Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I have so many thoughts and feelings about him, but I would recommend beginning with a short story of Dostoevsky's, because the novels are long and can be hard to get through. But my favorite short stories of his are White Nights and The Gambler. Also, I should mention that this edition is perennial classics, and it has Notes from Underground, The Gambler, A Disgraceful Affair, The Eternal Husband, The Double, White Nights, A Gentle Creature, and The Dream of a Ridiculous Man. And those are definitely his most famous stories, so this is a great addition to have. But The Gambler, I love. People hate this story, and I don't know why. I guess it's kind of confusing, but it's about a tutor. He is a tutor in a household, in a family, and he kind of travels with them, goes everywhere with them, and looks after the kids. I never remember characters' names, but I know that there's this tutor, and I think he teaches them French as well, doesn't matter. But he has a very unique position in this family. He has a connection to one of the women in the family, but not necessarily a romantic connection. It's kind of this weird thing that gets explored, this kind of tense power dynamic. And romantic or sexual relationships in Dostoevsky's works always follow this kind of weird power imbalance, these kind of games. And I find it really interesting to read about how women live in this world. And Dostoevsky's women are famously hysterical. They kind of all follow a certain type, and typically they've been abused, and they rebel against the men in their life, and they rebel against their kind of like the chains that they wear in society. And I absolutely love reading Dostoevsky's fiction because of this. I mean, there's different ways you can look at it. You can see this as kind of like people kind of hate when characters are symbols. Sometimes I find when I watch videos of people talking about books, they'll say this is a flat character, but sometimes there's value in symbols, and sometimes a type is a type for a reason, because it can encompass a large population. But now I'm getting so sorrowfully sidetracked. In this story, basically this whole family is on vacation in a German gambling town, and like a town with a casino where Russian people would go on vacation, and they're all waiting for like the grandma basically to die and leave them all their money, because they are a mess basically. And there's this brilliant scene in the beginning where the grandma kind of shows up at the casino and she's like, I'm alive. And it throws everything else into chaos. So I like that story. I enjoy it. And the next one, White Nights, is such a beautiful, haunting tale. It's about a man who, he doesn't even get a name in the story, but essentially he's just kind of a loner. He wanders the streets of Petersburg by himself. I think it's Petersburg. At night or even during the day, he just goes on these long walks staring at the buildings. He doesn't really have friends. We don't really know pretty much anything about him. All we know is that the main character goes on a walk and meets this beautiful woman, and they have an immediate connection, but it's not necessarily a romantic connection. It's just kind of like two souls that really see each other. And she decides to tell him about her troubles and her sorrows in love. She's in love with someone, and she doesn't know if they love her back, and she's kind of waiting to hear from them, and she's in this kind of difficult position. And I think the story takes place over the course of maybe just a few days, but the two of them keep going on walks and they keep talking about their lives. And I don't want to spoil too much, but essentially the protagonist starts thinking, what if this could be a romantic connection? What if we can be more than just friends? And you have to read to see what finds out, to see if the woman sees him in the same way or how that unfolds. But there's a beautiful quote in this story. I'll try and recite it off the top of my head, but it's, the narrator is talking about what a wonderful time he's having with this woman going on these walks, and how the thought of losing that is devastating to him. And he says something like, a whole life for just one moment of happiness, like, how is this enough? I completely paraphrase that, but it's a famous quote. I'm too lazy to go find it now. But it's a haunting, incredible story. I mean, Dostoevsky's obviously a brilliant writer. I just do think you're better off starting with these shorter stories, and then if you love the way he writes, go on to the novels 100%. I can talk about those in a completely different video, but I think that's it for today. I hope this was short and sweet. I feel like I could talk about these forever. And of course, there's stories I would have liked to include, but there's just not enough time. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.